Good morning, folks. Everything new under the sun. You're looking at AIPAC.org, AIPAC.org. If you don't know what this is the American Israeli lobby group. And basically, they set up a conference and they have several speakers. We have several high-ranking officials obviously coming. Netanyahu is going to speak at the conference. Nikki Haley, as you see there, she's going to speak. She is no longer the ambassador, but she was. Mitch McConnell's going to speak. Several big leaders, Charles Schumer. It goes on. This big conference is going to come out, and of course Netanyahu and other leaders, Gantz, etc., are going to attempt to use this for moving ahead their political goals. And this is from jpost.com. Campaigns move to AIPAC, however you want to pronounce that. Netanyahu, Gantz, Gabi, Bennett are all to appear. And Gantz's spokeswoman said he will use the speech to emphasize that if he wins the election, he will work to rebuild the relationship with American Jewry. So there are all the leaders who are hoping to win the election are coming here basically to speak to the American Israel base, those who support Israel, to get more support from the U.S. in general. It goes on here. Netanyahu is expected to meet with Trump as well during the visit to Washington, D.C., and there has been talk of White House setting up a state-like dinner in honor of the visiting Israeli Prime Minister. It's unclear if Gantz will hold diplomatic meetings while in Washington. Trump is unlikely to agree to a meeting with any of the other candidates while Netanyahu is in town. Out of respect for Netanyahu, obviously he doesn't want to hold meetings with Netanyahu's opponents right now. And so that's a situation that is going to roll into some of the other things. I want to kind of start off with what Representative Omar spoke about, what her tweets were about. Had several comments about, what is this about this Ilhan Omar? What was this anti-Semitic tweet? And you can Google it. Strangely, it's actually harder to find than you'd think. Ilhan Omar apologized for anti-Semitic tweet following backlash. This is a Democratic Congresswoman says her intention is never to offend after tweeting that AIPAC was paying American politicians to express support for Israel. So she's basically come out. Her tweet was that it was all about the money. And she did come out and backtrack, so that all this is about backtracking her comment there. But if we go down, let's see. The controversy erupted on Sunday when Minnesota Congresswoman tweeted that support for Israel in the United States was all about the Benjamins, referring to the Benjamin Franklin, whose image appears on $100 bills, and obviously the connection to Benjamin Netanyahu as well. She was saying that this was all about the money, and so this was an anti-Israel, against Israel. She wants to remove the support of Israel from the U.S. It says a growing list of Democratic lawmakers denounced Omar, with condemnations coming from members of Congress and other influential figures in the party. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi released a statement on the issue. Anti-Semitism must be called out, confronted and condemned whenever it is encountered. They were basically apologizing for her at first, but they've kind of been forced, the Democratic Party and leadership, to officially come out and denounce this because it was just too much, to be sure. Legitimate criticism of Israel's policies is protected by the values of free speech, but Congresswoman Omar's use of anti-Semitic tropes is deeply offensive, and so yeah, they should call her out on that. They shouldn't be making flippant statements, about the conversation and the support that Israel has from American Jewry, etc. But it is a big political game right now in Israel, in the U.S. The major leaders that are looking to get elected are coming to AIPAC, and they're looking for the support, and they are looking for the money ultimately. The U.S. gives a lot of money and support to Israel. And I think so. It should. We should support Israel, the only democratic nation in the area in the Middle East there, so we should support them when they're surrounded by effectively enemies. So that's what the tweet was about. That's what all the issues were about. Let's take a look at another article. This is breakingisraelnews.com, and this is about the Gate of Mercy, the Golden Gate as well, pictured in this image here. Israeli police stands strong in holy war at the Gate of Mercy. So, if the peace plan is what the whole world works towards, then you got to admit that the whole world is involved in a holy war, a spiritual war, a religious war. And that's what they're involved in right now, as everybody is calling for peace and security. So this is a continuation of the situation where the Arabs have set up another place to worship, put their mats on the ground, etc. And the Israeli police, who are tasked with keeping the security, basically are being bothered. A video released by Hamas Media Group intended to show the brutality of Israeli police showed instead one policeman standing against in the battle for Judaism's holy site. With a firm but polite demeanor, this policeman handles his daily beat, a situation that could explode into regional conflict. So every day, any one of these policemen could cause a regional conflict. They could cause a war by their actions. So incredibly, he stayed calm, and he was just doing his job, basically. So what was it about? And I'll put the links in the description. You can actually watch the video. But the video circulated on Hamas-affiliated Quds network is being shown as proof that Israeli police disrespected a mosque on the Temple Mount. Of course, they're standing up new mosques everywhere they can because they want to claim more and more of the Temple Mount area. The video was presented with the explanation an Israeli police officer refuses to take off his boot while entering Bab al-Rama section of the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem, a step seen as a breach of the sanctity of the holy site. But what was this about? Well, the details come out here. The policeman is carrying out the daily visual survey of the location. The Arab told the policeman to take off his shoes, since he was entering the mosque that they had basically just created in thin air. The officer tells him to speak in Hebrew so he can understand. The policeman tells him to video as much as he wants. The Arab then responds in Hebrew, "What you are doing is not good." The policeman tells him to move the carpets, basically so he can do his inspection properly. And once they move it, he will do his scan and leave. So a simple request: remove your carpet so that the policeman can do his check, and then he's going to leave. The Arab says that the policeman can look at the top of the carpets, and they do not have to move them. The cop answers, "I can do whatever I want." When the other Arab starts picking up the carpets, the Arab who is filming tells him to stop. So they're telling him to disobey a local law enforcement, effectively. The cop says, "Don't yell at him." The Arab filming says, "After you passed over," but does not complete a sentence. It goes on. On the way out, the cop says, "Next time, clear away your carpets." And of course, here's what the people adherent to Islam believe about the Jews. According to Islam, Jews are filthy, Dr. Kadar explained to Breaking Israel News. They will certainly wash those carpets now. I guess they were in contact with the cop, but and this is just one cop, and they're saying that this is starting a holy war on the Temple Mount. Well, in relation to this as well, now King Abdullah, and he, the king of Jordan, obviously, is coming to Washington to speak about the Temple Mount crisis. And of course, Jordan was given sovereignty, effectively, or not sovereignty, but control of the Temple Mount area, and they control it by way of the Waqf. The Waqf leadership, the committee that controls that area, and a couple of those guys a couple of the Waqf leadership was arrested by the Israeli police for disobeying and for not going along with court orders. It says the Jerusalem Magistrate Court is expected to allow police to close the building again unless the Waqf submits a written response to the court on Sunday. So the court said to close down that mosque, and the Arabs, the Muslims, didn't comply, and so they're in court again. So Jordan's King Abdullah left Amman for Washington on Saturday to speak with members of Congress about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including the crisis over the Golden Gate on the Temple Mount. In talks Thursday, Israeli and Jordanian officials failed to resolve what began on February 22nd when Jerusalem's Waqf Islamic Religious Trust unilaterally opened a building near the Golden Gate that Israel had closed since 2003, or closed in 2003. In response, Israel arrested a senior Waqf official 2 days later. So this is the situation that's brewing. So King Abdullah is coming from Jordan to discuss the situation. It says the Jerusalem Magistrates Court is expected to allow police to close the buildings again unless, it says, the Waqf submits a written response to the court on Sunday. Palestinian officials call on Muslim worshippers to head to the Temple Mount Friday to protest the court's intention. So they're basically sending protesters again, because this is all that they can do. I guess they don't want to put lawyers into the courts to argue it. They're just going to send protesters to the Temple Mount. By noon on Friday, thousands had gathered. The Israel police deployed mounted units and riot police to the Damascus Gate, along with the elite Yassam Special Patrol Unit, to confront any rioters. After the prayers ended, large crowds of male and female worshippers clogged the alleys of the Old City and historic Via Dolorosa. Tourists and Arab crowds pressed against each other, going in the opposite direction as police looked on. So potential for massive conflicts there, as the mixing of the Islamic protesters and all the other tourists and Arab crowds and Jews, etc. And so there's police all over all the time, and these issues keep coming up, and they keep sending more and more protesters. Several young men tried to incite the crowd, so they're looking to start trouble. They're looking to start the war. But for the most part, the worshippers walked out of the gate without any incident. Some young teens shouted at the police, and words were exchanged, but the police apparently had orders to reduce tensions, not to escalate it. So, I mean, the Israeli police are very calm, and they're controlling the tempers, if you will, quite well. They're doing an incredible job and not retaliating. And remember, a lot of these Israeli police and soldiers are very young as well. So they're doing an incredible job just keeping the peace there with all the Arab protesters who want to incite. They want violence, and they're trying to incite it. They're trying to get the crowd riled up to do some violence there. It goes on. According to the Jordan news agency, Abdullah is looking to bolster strategic partnership between Jordan and the United States. And we'll also discuss the latest regional developments, i.e. this whole flare-up about the mosque, the fifth mosque, the fact that the protesters, the Muslims, are not respecting the court orders, etc. It's all about the status quo, but the Muslims keep changing the status quo, and Israel's trying to keep the status quo. But anything the Jews do, anything Israel does, the Muslims basically suggest that they're attempting to change the status quo. And they're just always looking for a fight. They're always looking for a protest. They're always looking for some reason to rise up, if you will, against Israel. And it's prophetic. I don't want to get into the history of it. Ishmael and Isaac, and the history of the attitude of the Arabs, basically to cause issues, and that's a biblical precedent. I guess a video for another day. But they certainly don't like keeping the peace. Their first intention is not to keep the peace and just be obey the laws, etc. I don't know if it's that they don't have jobs, or I don't know what the problem is. It's a spiritual war. That's what the problem is. We don't fight against flesh and blood, but against higher powers, spiritual powers, and so that's what's going on the Temple Mount. And so it's to a point where King Abdullah is coming. Remember the guardian country of the Temple Mount, to discuss what they're going to do with the Waqf, to what they're going to do to resolve the situation there, and to continue the peace and the status quo, etc. Under the terms of Jordan's 1994 peace treaty with Israel, which is still in place, Muslim shrines on the Temple Mount fall under the custodianship of the Hashemite kingdom, i.e. Jordan. So, again, interesting situation there with Israel, with the Temple Mount. Remember, if the peace plan is something that's going to come into place, if it's going to be accepted and lauded by all members, all parties, Jews and Arabs, Muslim countries, etc., around Israel, what do you need? What you need is conflict. Conflict to the point that is loud enough, that is large enough, to the point where people are calling on the governments to provide peace and security. They're calling and they want a peace plan because there's just so much warring and argument and factions and trouble building in the area. So I would expect that if a peace plan is really to be implemented, then what we're going to see is a buildup of hostilities in the region that come to a boiling point, to the point where people on both sides are calling for peace and security to deal with the current situation, whatever that situation builds up to in the last days. So it's something to be watching. It's something to watch it over days and weeks and see the build-up, the escalation of events, how Israel handles it. Remember, if there's relative peace and calm on the Temple Mount and in the area, then there's not going to be any reason to get behind a peace plan, really. If they can come to an agreement outside of the peace plan, then there won't be a particular need for the peace plan. And the carrot on the stick of maybe the third temple, which may or may not be written into the peace plan, it's not going to be much of a carrot if the Jews are able to pray on the Temple Mount, if they're able to access it, etc. There's going to be less of a dire need. There's going to be less of a want to proceed with a peace plan that may otherwise really divide Israel, divide Jerusalem. If they don't really have a reason to need the third temple, if there really isn't a public push for peace and security, etc. So I guess I'll end by saying that if there's not trouble, if there's not a lack of peace and security, significantly so, then they're not going to need a peace plan, and they're not going to be willing as a country to vote for it, the Jews and even the Palestinians. So as we look at End Time Bible Prophecy, as we look at the peace plan, is this the peace plan that's going to usher in a 7-year tribulation that the Antichrist is going to push forth? Then you got to look at that situation and look at the buildup, and I expect a large buildup of frustration and violence and protests, almost to the point of war. And then the Antichrist will come in and say, let's stop this right now before it leads to absolute, just absolute bloodshed and war, and bring in this peace plan, whatever it may be, to calm down the situation. So I expect a significant escalation prior to the actual deployment of peace plan. Otherwise, you won't have both parties on each side really wanting that peace plan. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll leave it there. Interesting set of events and stories going on here related to Israel and anti-Semitism, which is growing in the world. And this is all part of End Time Bible Prophecy. So as we watch this, we will say, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus, come. And thanks for watching, guys. If you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, He's coming back soon. And you need to find Him. Today is the day of salvation. We'll see you guys in the next video.